I sat across from Mr. Tanaka during the most important negotiation of my career, a $12 million consulting contract that could save our struggling firm. My boss, David Price, suddenly interrupted, his face red with anger, pointing directly at me. "Sharon, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this meeting." The words hit like ice water. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows furrow in confusion as I feel my world crashing down around me. 6 months ago, everything had seemed so promising. I joined Meridian Consulting after my previous company downsized, bringing 15 years of experience in Asian markets and something most of my colleagues lacked, fluent Japanese. The language had been my college minor, refined through 2 years teaching English in Osaka, and countless hours of practice that started as academic curiosity and became genuine passion. David Price had recruited me personally, praising my international expertise during our interview at a trendy downtown Chicago restaurant. He spoke enthusiastically about expanding the firm's global reach, particularly into Japanese markets where American consulting firms struggled to gain traction. His vision seemed to align perfectly with my background, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement that comes with finding the right professional fit. The first few months were a whirlwind of relationship building. I spent countless late nights on video calls with Mr. Tanaka's electronics company, carefully navigating time zone differences and cultural nuances. These weren't simple business conversations. They were intricate dances of respect, patience, and gradual trust building that Japanese business culture demands. I researched his company's history, learned about their founder's philosophy, and studied the subtle protocols that would show genuine appreciation for their traditions. Mr. Tanaka appreciated my approach immediately. Where other Western consultants had failed by rushing into aggressive sales pitches, I took time to understand his company's values and long-term vision. Our conversations evolved from formal business exchanges to thoughtful discussions about market trends, innovation strategies, and the challenges of bridging Eastern and Western business philosophies. But something troubling began emerging in my interactions with David. During team meetings, he would present my research and strategies as collaborative efforts, subtly repositioning himself as the primary architect of our Japanese market approach. When I developed a breakthrough analysis of consumer behavior patterns in Tokyo markets, David presented it to senior partners as our team's innovative framework, barely mentioning my role. The pattern became increasingly obvious. My detailed cultural assessments became David's cultural intelligence initiatives. My painstakingly developed relationship with Mr. Tanaka was described as David's strategic partnership building. Every success I achieved was filtered through his narrative, diminishing my contributions while amplifying his leadership. 3 weeks ago, I overheard a conversation that shattered my remaining trust. David was on the phone with Human Resources, his office door slightly ajar as I passed by delivering quarterly reports. "Schedule Sharon's termination for after the Tanaka deal closes," he said casually, as if discussing lunch plans. "We need her expertise to secure the contract, but afterward, her position becomes redundant. The client relationship will be established, and we can manage it with less expensive resources." My stomach lurched as the implications sank in. David wasn't just stealing credit for my work, he was planning to discard me the moment I'd served his purposes. He intended to use my expertise to secure a $12 million contract, then eliminate me before I could benefit from the success I'd created. The following weeks were torture. I continued building my relationship with Mr. Tanaka, while knowing that David planned to betray everything I'd worked toward. I maintained professional composure during strategy sessions where David outlined his vision for the Japanese partnership, fighting back waves of anger and disbelief. This morning, as I prepared for the crucial negotiation, I caught David in another lie. He was briefing the senior partners about the meeting, taking full credit for developing the relationship with Tanaka's company. "My personal connection with their CEO has been instrumental," he declared confidently. "I've invested months building trust through cultural understanding and language skills." I stood in the hallway, listening to him claim abilities he didn't possess and relationships he'd never built. David spoke not a word of Japanese. His idea of cultural sensitivity was bowing awkwardly during video calls and making uninformed comments about sushi preferences. Every meaningful interaction with Mr. Tanaka had flowed through my translation and cultural mediation. Now, sitting in this conference room with Mr. Tanaka looking bewildered and David's words still hanging in the air, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just professional betrayal, it was theft of my identity, my capabilities, and my future. David had calculated this moment perfectly, waiting until the most humiliating possible circumstances to destroy my reputation and steal the fruits of my labor. But as I looked at Mr. Tanaka's confused expression and saw the genuine concern in his eyes, I realized something David hadn't anticipated. The relationship I'd built wasn't just professional, it was based on mutual respect and authentic communication. Mr. Tanaka knew who had really been guiding this partnership, even if David had convinced himself otherwise. The rage burning in my chest began transforming into something more powerful: clarity. David's betrayal was about to become the catalyst for a decision that would change everything. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room focus on me. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the polished conference table, where documents for the $12 million deal lay scattered like fallen leaves. David's triumphant smirk faltered slightly as I maintained perfect composure despite his public humiliation. Then I did something that transformed the entire dynamic in that sterile corporate environment. I turned to Mr. Tanaka and spoke in flawless Japanese. "Tanaka-san, this unprofessional display embarrasses me deeply," I said, my voice carrying the formal respect his position demanded. "As you can observe, I am no longer employed by this organization." The change in Mr. Tanaka's expression was immediate and profound. His eyes widened with genuine surprise, then something else: recognition and understanding. For months, every conversation he'd believed he was having with David had actually been mediated through my translation. Every cultural insight David had supposedly shared had originated from my research and analysis. "You speak Japanese," Mr. Tanaka said slowly in his native language, his tone carrying layers of meaning that the others in the room couldn't comprehend. "All this time, you were the one I was truly speaking with." David's face had gone pale. He couldn't understand our exchange, but he could sense the power shifting beneath his feet like sand in an earthquake. His eyes darted frantically between Mr. Tanaka and me, searching for clues about what was happening in a language he'd never bothered to learn. "Indeed," I continued in Japanese, savoring the moment of absolute honesty. "Every market analysis you praised, every cultural insight you appreciated, every strategy recommendation that impressed your board, those came from my research and understanding. Mr. Price has never spoken with you directly. He does not possess the language skills or cultural knowledge necessary for authentic communication with your organization." Mr. Tanaka's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a sign of controlled anger that would be invisible to Western eyes but spoke volumes in Japanese business culture. He had been deceived, manipulated through a linguistic and cultural barrier he'd trusted others to bridge honestly. "The relationship between our companies," Mr. Tanaka said carefully, "was built on my belief that I was working with someone who understood both our language and our business philosophy. If that person is no longer part of this organization," I could see David growing increasingly agitated as he remained excluded from a conversation happening directly in front of him. His face reddened with frustration and dawning panic as he realized that control of the situation had slipped completely from his grasp. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, switching back to English so everyone could understand, "I appreciate the months we've spent building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. That foundation was genuine, even if the professional context was misrepresented." Then I spoke the words that had been forming in my mind since David's betrayal became clear. "My consulting fee is now 10%, and I work for you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the building's ventilation system seemed to pause as everyone processed what had just occurred. David's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, like a fish gasping for air. The junior associates flanking him looked between us with expressions of shock and growing fascination. Mr. Tanaka leaned back in his leather chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him all morning. "Interesting," he murmured in English, then continued in Japanese. "A consultant who speaks honestly and directly. This is refreshing." David finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled protest. "Sharon, you cannot negotiate directly with our client. You're terminated. Security will escort you from the premises immediately." "Your client?" Mr. Tanaka interjected, his English carrying a sharp edge that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. You just fired your liaison? The person who has been facilitating every aspect of our business relationship? The question hung in the air like a blade. David's mouth worked frantically as he searched for an explanation that might salvage the catastrophe unfolding before him. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time, revealing the hollow incompetence beneath his confident exterior. There must be some misunderstanding, David stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the room's professional climate control. Sharon was merely a translator. I've been managing the strategic aspects of our partnership personally. Mr. Tanaka's expression grew colder. In Japanese business culture, being caught in such an obvious deception was devastating to one's professional credibility. I watched as he processed not just the immediate lie, but the implications of months of manipulated communication. A translator, Mr. Tanaka repeated slowly, his tone carrying dangerous implications. Who conducted detailed market analyses? Who understood the philosophical foundations of our business approach? Who recommended strategies that impressed our board of directors? Each word landed like a physical blow. David's breathing became shallow as the magnitude of his exposure became clear. He'd built his entire approach to this deal on a lie that was now unraveling in front of the most important client in the firm's recent history. I remained standing calmly, feeling a strange peace settle over me despite the chaos erupting around us. For months, I'd felt invisible, my contributions filtered through David's ego and ambition. Now, finally, the truth was emerging in its full complexity. The power in that room had shifted completely. David, who had entered the meeting as the commanding authority figure, now sat exposed and diminishing before our eyes. Mr. Tanaka, who had been led to believe he was working with one person, was discovering the authentic relationship he'd actually built with another. And I, who had been silenced and marginalized, suddenly found my voice carrying the weight of truth and professional competence. The foundation for everything that would follow was now in place. Mr. Tanaka set his pen down with deliberate precision and looked directly at David. The gesture carried weight in Japanese business culture, a signal that serious reconsideration was underway. When he spoke, his English was crisp and unforgiving. You just fired your liaison? The individual my board specifically requested to continue as our primary contact? The words hit the conference room like a thunderclap. David's face went ashen as the implications registered. This wasn't just about losing a valuable employee. This was about discovering that his client had preferences and requirements he'd been completely unaware of. Your board requested Sharon specifically? David's voice cracked slightly on the question. Indeed. Mr. Tanaka's tone remained professional, but underlying steel was evident. 3 weeks ago, during our quarterly board review in Tokyo, the directors specifically praised the innovative market entry strategies and cultural sensitivity demonstrated by our American contact. They requested that Sharon-san continue as our primary liaison for all future initiatives. I felt the ground shift beneath my understanding of the entire situation. While David had been planning my termination, Mr. Tanaka's board had been planning to request my continued involvement. The irony was staggering. David was destroying the very relationship his client had specifically asked to preserve. However, Mr. Tanaka continued, his gaze moving from David to me. It appears there has been significant misrepresentation about the structure of your organization and who has actually been responsible for the exceptional work we have valued. David began a desperate damage control attempt. Mr. Tanaka, I assure you that our firm can provide continuity in your service. We have other qualified professionals who can seamlessly transition into this role. Sharon's departure will not impact the quality of our partnership. Other qualified professionals, Mr. Tanaka repeated slowly, who speak fluent Japanese, who understand the subtleties of our business culture, who have invested months in understanding our company's specific needs and market position. Each question was a nail in David's professional coffin. The answers were obvious to everyone in the room. There were no other qualified professionals. Sharon's expertise was unique within the firm, irreplaceable and specifically valued by the client. Furthermore, Mr. Tanaka continued, I am curious about your personal role in our partnership, Mr. Price. In our previous video conferences, you rarely spoke directly. Most communication flowed through Sharon-san's facilitation. I was under the impression this was due to your busy schedule, but perhaps the reality is different? The net was closing around David's deception. I remembered those video calls clearly. David would sit at the head of the table, nodding sagely while I conducted the actual conversations in Japanese, then summarizing and translating for his benefit. He'd created an illusion of leadership while being functionally dependent on my expertise. "I want to understand something clearly," Mr. Tanaka said, his businesslike demeanor becoming more pronounced. "When Sharon-san developed the market penetration analysis that impressed our Tokyo board, who was actually responsible for that work?" David's silence stretched uncomfortably. He couldn't claim credit for work that had been conducted in a language he didn't speak, based on cultural insights he didn't possess, using research methodologies he'd never learned. And the cultural integration strategies that our directors found so innovative. Who created those recommendations? Another damning silence. The consumer behavior analysis that identified previously overlooked market segments in Osaka and Kyoto. Who conducted that research? David's carefully constructed professional identity was collapsing question by question. Mr. Tanaka wasn't just exposing the deception. He was methodically demonstrating that everything of value in their business relationship had originated from the person David had just fired. "It appears," Mr. Tanaka said with the precision of a surgeon making a critical incision, "that you have terminated the individual responsible for everything our organization has found valuable in this partnership." The junior associates flanking David exchanged glances, loaded with professional embarrassment. They were witnessing their supervisor's complete professional humiliation, and the second-hand discomfort was palpable. "Mr. Tanaka," David tried one more desperate gambit, "perhaps we can discuss restructuring Sharon's role within our organization. I'm sure we can reach an accommodation that serves everyone's interests." "Restructuring?" Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose slightly. "You mean rehiring the person you just fired in front of your most important client? The person whose expertise you clearly cannot replace? The person my board specifically requested to continue as our liaison?" The absurdity of David's position was now completely exposed. He had publicly terminated an irreplaceable employee in front of the client who specifically valued that employee's contributions. There was no graceful recovery from such a catastrophic error in judgment. "I must be frank with you, Mr. Price," Mr. Tanaka said, his tone becoming formal in a way that signaled serious business implications. "Our organization values stability, competence, and honest communication. Today's events have raised significant concerns about your firm's ability to provide these qualities." The threat was clear without being explicitly stated. The $12 million contract that had seemed secured was now in jeopardy because David had prioritized his ego over his client's clearly expressed preferences. "If Sharon-san is no longer affiliated with your organization, Mr. Tanaka continued, "and if she represents the expertise and cultural understanding that our board specifically requested, then perhaps we need to reconsider the structure of our business relationship entirely." I watched David's world crumble in real time. His face had gone from red with anger to pale with panic to gray with the realization that his betrayal had backfired spectacularly. He'd tried to steal credit for my work and eliminate me from the equation, only to discover that I wasn't just valuable to the partnership, I was irreplaceable. Mr. Tanaka turned to me with renewed respect in his expression. "Sharon-san, your proposition of independent consulting is intriguing. Perhaps we should discuss this arrangement in more detail." The power shift was complete. David, who had entered this meeting as the authority figure controlling everyone's fate, was now desperately hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of his own making. Mr. Tanaka, who had been led to believe he was working with one person, was now eager to work directly with the person who had actually earned his trust and respect. And I, who had walked into this room expecting to be humiliated and discarded, was suddenly holding all the leverage in a $12 million negotiation. The conference room phone rang with jarring suddenness, cutting through the tension like a fire alarm. David glanced at it with irritation, clearly hoping to ignore the interruption, but the receptionist's voice crackled through the speaker system. "Mr. Price? I have Herr Mueller from Bavarian Automotive on line 2. He's asking specifically for Sharon and says it's urgent regarding their expansion consultation." David's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. "Tell him Sharon is unavailable and transfer the call to my office." "Sir, he doesn't speak English very well. He's been calling every hour asking for Sharon specifically." My heart began racing, as pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed started falling into place. Herr Mueller was the CEO of a mid-sized automotive parts company. I'd been helping with market research for their potential American expansion. I'd been conducting our conversations in German, another language I'd picked up during a college semester in Berlin. "I can take the call," I offered, my mind spinning with possibilities. "Absolutely not," David snapped, but Mr. Tanaka interjected. "Perhaps we should hear what this urgent matter involves," he suggested with the tone of someone accustomed to having his suggestions treated as directives. The receptionist connected the call, and Herr Mueller's anxious voice filled the room. He spoke rapidly in German, expressing concern about missing our scheduled consultation and asking whether there were problems with the consulting relationship. I responded in fluent German, explaining that there had been some organizational changes but that his project remained a priority. His relief was audible as he confirmed several upcoming meetings and expressed gratitude for my continued involvement in their expansion strategy. As I concluded the call, another line began ringing. "Mr. Price? I have Senhor Costa from Brazilian Manufacturing Alliance calling from Sao Paulo. He also wants to speak with Sharon specifically." David's face had gone pale. "How many clients are calling for Sharon specifically?" Before anyone could answer, the receptionist's voice returned with barely concealed bewilderment. "Sir, I have 3 more international calls holding. There's someone from a textiles company in Mumbai, a technology firm in Stockholm, and a pharmaceutical company in Montreal. They're all asking for Sharon by name." The room fell into stunned silence as the magnitude of what was being revealed sank in. David had been so focused on claiming credit for the Japanese partnership that he'd been oblivious to the broader network of international relationships I'd been building. Mr. Tanaka's expression shifted to something approaching amusement. "Sharon-san appears to be quite popular with international clients." I felt dizzy as the calls continued. Each conversation revealed another piece of a professional puzzle I'd been assembling without fully realizing its scope. The German automotive company, the Brazilian manufacturers, the Indian textiles firm, that are Lion. I'd been developing these relationships gradually, providing cultural insights and market analysis, while thinking of them as individual consulting projects. David's attempts to intercept the calls proved futile. When he tried to speak with the Brazilian client, the language barrier became immediately apparent. His pidgin Spanish was inadequate for complex business discussions, and Senor Costa quickly asked to be transferred back to me. "You speak Portuguese too?" David asked in disbelief. "And Spanish? And basic Hindi for the Mumbai client," I replied, still processing the revelation that my diverse language skills had created something I hadn't intended, a substantial international consulting practice operating within David's firm. Each phone call brought new revelations. The Stockholm technology firm had been so impressed with my market analysis that they'd recommended my services to other Scandinavian companies. The Montreal pharmaceutical company had been planning to request an expanded consulting relationship specifically with me. "How long has this been going on?" David demanded. "These relationships developed gradually over the past year," I explained. "Companies would hear about my work through referrals and request similar consulting services. I assumed you were aware since all the contracts went through the firm." The devastating truth was becoming clear. While David had been focused on taking credit for my Japanese market work, I'd inadvertently built an international consulting network that he'd been completely unaware of. His plan to fire me wasn't just betrayal. It was professional suicide that would cost the firm multiple lucrative client relationships. Mr. Tanaka observed the unfolding chaos with growing interest. "It appears Sharon-san has developed quite an extensive international practice. How much annual revenue do these relationships represent?" I'd never calculated the cumulative value, but as I mentally reviewed the various contracts and ongoing projects, the number was staggering. "Approximately $18 million annually," I said, surprising myself with the total. David's mouth fell open. The firm's total annual revenue was around $45 million. I had been single-handedly responsible for nearly 40% of the company's income, and he'd been planning to eliminate me to claim credit for one $12 million deal. "18 million, David repeated weakly. The phone kept ringing. More international clients calling to confirm meetings, discuss project timelines, and express concern about communication delays. Each call reinforced the same devastating reality. I'd become the primary point of contact for a massive international client base that David had no ability to service. "Mr. Price," Mr. Tanaka said with barely concealed satisfaction, "it seems your organization faces a rather significant problem. You have just terminated the individual responsible for 40% of your annual revenue, whom multiple international clients specifically request by name, and whom you apparently cannot replace." David slumped in his chair, the full scope of his catastrophic error finally registering. He'd been so focused on stealing credit for my work that he'd failed to understand the true value of what he was destroying. The power dynamics in that conference room had shifted beyond anything I could have imagined when I'd walked in that morning expecting to be humiliated and discarded. The conference room door opened with authority that made everyone look up simultaneously. Margaret Washington, the firm's managing partner, stepped inside with the kind of presence that comes from 30 years of building a consulting empire. Behind her followed Janet Rodriguez from Human Resources and 2 associates I recognized from the legal department. The cavalry had arrived, but based on Margaret's expression, they weren't here to rescue David. "Gentlemen, ladies," Margaret said, her silver hair perfectly styled and her voice carrying the controlled power of someone accustomed to managing crises. "I understand we're having some personnel difficulties during an important client meeting." David straightened hopefully, clearly expecting executive support for his position. "Margaret, thank goodness you're here. There's been some confusion about Sharon's employment status, and our client seems to have misunderstood the situation." Margaret's gray eyes moved to Mr. Tanaka with professional respect. "Mr. Tanaka, please accept my personal apologies for any disruption to your business meeting. I'm here to address these issues immediately." Then she did something that changed the entire atmosphere in the room. She spoke directly to me in flawless Japanese. "Sharon-san, I hope you will forgive this unprofessional interruption to your important negotiation. We need to discuss recent developments that affect both your position and our client relationships." My surprise must have shown clearly. I hadn't known that Margaret spoke Japanese, but her fluency was evident and culturally appropriate. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose with interest as he responded. "Washington-san, your Japanese is excellent. Perhaps you can explain the confusion regarding Sharon-san's employment status." Margaret nodded gravely. "There has been a significant misunderstanding that we are here to correct. May we continue this conversation in English so all parties can participate?" She turned to address the room with the commanding presence that had built Meridian Consulting into a nationally respected firm. "Over the past 3 weeks, our HR department has been conducting an investigation into reports of management misconduct and misrepresentation of employee contributions." David's face went ashen as Margaret continued. "We received multiple communications from international clients expressing concern about inconsistencies in their service relationships. Specifically, several clients reported that the individual they'd been working with directly, Sharon, seemed to have limited decision-making authority despite demonstrating exceptional expertise and results." Janet Rodriguez stepped forward with a thick folder of documentation. "Our investigation revealed a pattern of credit misappropriation and systematic undermining of employee contributions. Sharon's work has been consistently misrepresented in internal reports and client communications." "Misrepresented how?" Mr. Tanaka asked with sharp interest. "Sharon's individual achievements were routinely attributed to team efforts or management oversight," Margaret explained. "Her direct client relationships were characterized as supervisory management, when, in fact, they were independent consulting arrangements that she developed and maintained personally." David tried to interrupt. "Margaret, Sharon works under my supervision. Her success reflects the quality of my management and the firm's collaborative approach." Margaret's expression could have frozen water. "David, you were about to terminate our most valuable international consultant during a meeting with our largest potential client. That demonstrates catastrophically poor judgment, not effective management." She gestured to Janet, who opened her folder and began reading from documented evidence. "Our investigation found that Sharon has been solely responsible for developing and maintaining relationships with 12 international clients representing $38 million in annual contracts," Janet read. "These relationships were built through her linguistic abilities, cultural expertise, and individual consulting skills. Management supervision was minimal and, in several cases, completely absent. $38 million. The number was even higher than my earlier estimate, and hearing it stated officially made my contribution to the firm undeniable. Furthermore, Janet continued, we found evidence that Sharon submitted a resignation letter 4 months ago expressing concerns about credit attribution and professional recognition. This resignation was intercepted and never processed through proper HR channels. I stared at David in shock. You intercepted my resignation? We found the letter in David's desk during our investigation, Margaret said grimly, along with performance evaluations that significantly undervalued your contributions and bonus recommendations that were well below industry standards for someone generating your level of revenue. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward with visible interest. Sharon-san submitted a resignation 4 months ago, due to concerns about professional recognition? Indeed, Margaret confirmed. Concerns that our investigation has validated completely. David's desperation was becoming palpable. Margaret, you're making this sound worse than it is. Sharon is a valuable team member, but the international expansion has been a collaborative effort. I've been developing the strategic frameworks while she handles linguistic support. Linguistic support? Margaret's voice carried dangerous undertones. David, Sharon developed the entire Asian market entry strategy that impressed 3 different client boards. She created the cultural analysis framework that we're now using for all international consulting. She personally negotiated contracts worth millions of dollars while you were attending regional conferences. The documentation Janet was holding apparently contained devastating evidence of David's professional misconduct. Each revelation made his earlier behavior seem more calculated and malicious. Mr. Tanaka, Margaret said, switching back to Japanese briefly before returning to English, I want you to know that Sharon's departure from our firm was never authorized by senior management. David acted independently, without consultation or approval. So, Sharon is not actually terminated? Mr. Tanaka asked. Sharon was never legally terminated, Margaret replied firmly. David lacks the authority to make such decisions unilaterally, especially regarding our most successful international consultant. The power dynamic had shifted yet again. David, who had seemed so confident and authoritative an hour ago, was now revealed as someone who had been systematically undermining the firm's most valuable employee while lacking the authority to control her employment status. However, Margaret continued, looking directly at me, given the circumstances that have been revealed today, I believe Sharon deserves the opportunity to determine her own professional future. She turned to David with the kind of expression that ends careers. David, your employment with Meridian Consulting is terminated immediately. Your access to company resources, client information, and office facilities is revoked. Security will escort you from the building. The silence that followed was absolute. David's professional destruction was swift and complete, witnessed by the very client he'd tried to impress through my humiliation. Sharon, Margaret said, her tone shifting to something approaching respect and perhaps even admiration, I would like to offer you David's position as Director of International Development, with full autonomy over your client relationships, equity participation in the firm, and retroactive compensation for the contributions that have been undervalued. The offer hung in the air like a golden opportunity, the kind of professional advancement that should have felt like vindication and triumph. But as I looked around that conference room, at Margaret's expectant expression, at Mr. Tanaka's interested observation, at David's stunned devastation, I realized something profound about my own professional journey. The betrayal that had seemed like my destruction had actually revealed my true value and capabilities, and with that knowledge came a different kind of power, the power to choose my own path forward. The weight of Margaret's offer settled over the room like expensive perfume, impressive, but somehow suffocating. Director of International Development, Equity Participation, Retroactive Compensation. Everything I should want, everything that would validate my professional worth within the existing structure. But as I stood there, looking at the expectant faces around the conference table, I felt something unexpected, clarity about what I didn't want. Margaret, I appreciate the recognition and the generous offer, I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to say. But I'm going to respectfully decline. Margaret's eyebrows rose in surprise. Sharon, you understand what we're offering? This would make you one of the youngest senior partners in the firm's history, with complete control over your consulting practice. I understand perfectly, I replied. feeling a strange peace settle over me as the decision crystallized, and that's precisely why I need to leave. David, who had been slumped in his chair processing his own professional catastrophe, suddenly looked up with malicious hope. "She's making a mistake, Margaret. Don't let her manipulate this situation into a better negotiating position." I ignored him completely, addressing Margaret directly. "For the past 6 months, I've been building something I didn't even realize existed. These international relationships, these consulting successes, this expertise that everyone values. I created all of this while being systematically undermined and having my contributions minimized." Mr. Tanaka listened intently as I continued. "If I can build a $40 million consulting practice while being held back, what could I achieve with complete professional freedom?" The question resonated through the room like a bell. Margaret's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect and perhaps a touch of envy. "You're starting your own firm," she said, not really a question. "Yes." The word came out with more confidence than I'd felt about any professional decision in years. Today has shown me that I've been limiting myself by working within someone else's vision of my capabilities. Mr. Tanaka's slight smile grew more pronounced. "A bold decision, Sharon-san, and perhaps a wise one." Margaret leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "You realize you'll be giving up the security of an established firm, the resources, the infrastructure." "I'll be gaining something more valuable," I interrupted gently. "Complete ownership of my work, direct relationships with my clients, and the opportunity to build something that reflects my actual capabilities rather than someone else's willingness to recognize them." The phone rang again, another international client calling specifically for me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, turning to address the man whose contract had started this entire chain of events, "your board requested to continue working with me specifically. Would you be willing to become the first client of my independent consulting practice?" His answer came without hesitation. "Our board will be delighted to work directly with you, Sharon-san. In fact, I suspect they will want to expand our consulting relationship significantly." Margaret sighed, recognizing that she was watching significant revenue walk out the door. "Sharon, if you're determined to leave, Meridian won't pursue any legal obstacles to your departure. Your non-compete clause is nullified given the circumstances of David's misconduct. However," she continued with the shrewd business sense that had built her firm, "we'd like to propose a referral arrangement. When your practice grows beyond your capacity, we'd appreciate being considered for overflow work." The suggestion showed remarkable pragmatism. Rather than losing my client base entirely, Margaret was positioning her firm to benefit from my success. It was a graceful acknowledgement that trying to fight my departure would be both futile and counterproductive. "I'd be open to discussing referral partnerships," I agreed. "Professional courtesy benefits everyone." David finally spoke up, his voice carrying desperate bitterness. "This is insane. You're all enabling her to steal our clients. Margaret, you need to enforce the non-compete agreements and protect the firm's intellectual property." Margaret's response was swift and final. "David, you no longer work here. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Your opinions are no longer relevant to our business decisions." 2 security guards entered as if summoned by her words. David's removal was swift and humiliating, a fitting end to his attempt to destroy my career through public humiliation. As David was escorted out, Mr. Tanaka stood and bowed slightly in my direction. "Sharon-san, I look forward to beginning our new business relationship. Our board meeting is next week in Tokyo. Would you be available to present your expansion recommendations directly to our directors?" "I'll be honored to attend," I replied, bowing appropriately in return. Margaret gathered her materials with professional efficiency. "Sharon, I'll have Janet prepare your final paperwork and ensure all your client files are transferred to you. Your final paycheck will include the retroactive bonuses you should have received." As the meeting dispersed, I found myself alone in the conference room for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 6 hours ago, I'd walked into this building as an undervalued employee, expecting to be fired. Now I was walking out as an independent consultant with my first major client secured and a professional network worth tens of millions of dollars. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that I had to remind myself it was really happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Herr Muller in Germany. "Sharon, My board approved expanding our consulting relationship. Can we schedule a call to discuss a long-term partnership? Then another from Senhor Costa in Brazil. Our expansion timeline has been accelerated. Do you have capacity for additional project work? As I gathered my personal belongings from my former desk, I realized that David's betrayal had been the catalyst for discovering something I'd never recognized about myself. I'd been ready for independence for months without knowing it. His attempt to steal credit for my work had forced me to claim ownership of my capabilities in a way I might never have done otherwise. Walking toward the elevator, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fear and anger from this morning had transformed into excitement and anticipation. For the first time in my career, I was about to discover what I could achieve when my success was entirely my own. 6 months later, I stood in my new office overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the water. The space was nothing like the sterile corporate environment I'd left behind. Exposed brick walls, comfortable seating areas for client meetings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the room with natural light. My independent consulting practice, Cultural Bridge International, occupied the entire 14th floor of a restored historical building in Chicago's River North District. What had started as a desperate decision during a moment of professional crisis had evolved into something beyond my wildest expectations. The Japanese contract with Mr. Tanaka's company had been just the beginning. His board had been so impressed with my direct presentation in Tokyo that they'd expanded our agreement to include their subsidiaries across Southeast Asia. The $12 million deal that David had tried to steal had grown into a $35 million partnership spanning 3 years. But the real transformation went far beyond financial success. Each morning I woke up excited about the work ahead of me, rather than dreading another day of having my contributions minimized and my expertise filtered through someone else's agenda. My team had grown to include 8 consultants, each bringing specialized expertise in different markets and languages. Maria specialized in Latin American business culture and spoke 4 languages fluently. James had spent a decade working in European markets and understood the regulatory complexities that American companies faced abroad. Sarah brought expertise in Middle Eastern business practices and had helped 3 clients navigate successful expansions into Gulf markets. We'd become known for something unique in the consulting world, authentic cultural expertise rather than superficial market analysis. Our success came from understanding that international business wasn't just about adapting products for different markets, but about building genuine relationships across cultural boundaries. The phone on my desk chimed softly. My assistant, Patricia, had screened the call and determined it was worth my immediate attention. Sharon, I have the CEO of Pacific Technologies on line 1. They're interested in your services for a potential expansion into Asian markets. I smiled, remembering how such calls used to be filtered through David's ego and ambition. Now, I spoke directly with decision-makers who valued expertise over corporate politics. The conversation with Pacific Technologies was typical of how my business had evolved. They weren't looking for generic market research or superficial cultural guidelines. They wanted someone who could help them build authentic relationships with potential partners and understand the deeper cultural factors that determine success or failure in international ventures. We've heard about your work with Tanaka Industries, the CEO explained. Their board specifically recommended your firm when we mentioned our expansion plans. They said you understand both the business and cultural aspects in ways that other consultants miss. As we discussed their needs, I reflected on how dramatically different this conversation felt from those I'd had while working at Meridian. There was no David Price hovering to steal credit or second-guess my recommendations. No corporate hierarchy filtering my expertise through layers of management ego. Just direct communication between professionals who respected each other's capabilities. After scheduling a follow-up meeting, I walked to the conference room where my team was preparing for our weekly client review. The space buzzed with engaged conversation as consultants shared insights from their various projects and discussed creative approaches to cultural challenges. Sharon, Maria called out as I entered. The automotive company in Munich wants to expand our consulting relationship to include their North American operations. They're so pleased with the market entry strategy that they want us to help with internal cultural integration for their American workforce. These kinds of organic growth opportunities had become common, Clients who experienced genuine value from our culturally informed approach naturally wanted to expand the relationship. Our reputation was built on delivering results that other consulting firms couldn't achieve because they lacked authentic cultural expertise. During the meeting, James shared an update that made me particularly proud. The pharmaceutical company in Montreal has decided to open a permanent office in Stockholm based on our market analysis. They credit our cultural insights with helping them understand opportunities that previous consultants had completely missed. These success stories validated everything I'd believed about the importance of authentic cultural understanding in international business. We weren't just helping companies enter new markets, we were helping them build sustainable relationships that created long-term value. As the meeting concluded, Patricia brought me a message that made my day complete. Margaret Washington called from Meridian Consulting. She wanted to know if you'd be interested in a referral partnership for a European client that needs expertise they don't have in-house. The irony was perfect. Meridian, the firm that had systematically undervalued my contributions, was now referring business to me because they recognized they couldn't replicate what I offered. "Tell Margaret I'll be happy to discuss it," I replied. Professional courtesy had served me well, and there was no reason to harbor grudges when there were opportunities for mutually beneficial collaboration. That afternoon I received an email that brought the transformation full circle. Mr. Tanaka was writing to inform me that his company's board had voted unanimously to recommend Cultural Bridge International as their preferred consulting partner for all international expansion initiatives. "Sharon-san," the email read, "your expertise and cultural understanding have exceeded every expectation. Our partnership has been so successful that our board wants to ensure continued access to your services for all future international ventures. We consider you not just a consultant, but a trusted advisor whose insights have been invaluable to our growth strategy." As I finished reading, I thought about David Price for the first time in weeks. I'd heard through professional networks that he'd struggled to find comparable employment after his termination from Meridian. His reputation in the consulting industry had been damaged by the circumstances of his departure, and potential employers were naturally cautious about someone who'd made such catastrophically poor judgment regarding valuable employees. There was no satisfaction in his professional difficulties, but there was validation in seeing that actions have consequences in professional environments. His attempt to steal credit and eliminate me had backfired so completely that it had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of ego-driven leadership. More importantly, his betrayal had forced me to recognize my own value and capabilities in ways I might never have discovered otherwise. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to your best life. The lesson had become the foundation of how I approached both business and personal relationships. Authentic value cannot be stolen or diminished by others' attempts to claim credit. When you know your worth and can demonstrate it consistently, the truth emerges regardless of temporary setbacks or betrayals. My phone buzzed with a text from a former colleague at Meridian. "Sharon, 3 of us are considering leaving to start our own practice. Would you be available for coffee to discuss how you made the transition so successfully?" The message reminded me that my journey had become an inspiration for others who felt undervalued or constrained by corporate environments that didn't recognize their potential. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing that my experience could help others find their own paths to professional authenticity and success. As the workday ended and I prepared to leave the office, I paused at my window overlooking Lake Michigan. The water reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds, and I thought about how much my life had changed since that devastating morning 6 months ago. David's betrayal had felt like professional destruction, but it had actually been liberation. His attempt to humiliate me had forced me to stand up for my value and claim ownership of my capabilities. His plan to steal my work had backfired so completely that it had launched me into a level of success I'd never imagined possible. The deepest satisfaction came from knowing that everything I'd achieved was genuinely mine. Every client relationship was built on authentic expertise and cultural understanding. Every success story reflected my actual capabilities rather than someone else's willingness to acknowledge them. Every day brought opportunities to grow and challenge myself without artificial limitations imposed by others' insecurities. Walking toward the elevator, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from those painful months of betrayal and uncertainty. You cannot build lasting success by diminishing others or stealing credit for their contributions. but you also cannot achieve your full potential by allowing others to define your worth or limit your possibilities. Authentic success comes from knowing your value, demonstrating it consistently, and having the courage to claim ownership of your capabilities when circumstances demand it. Sometimes that requires walking away from apparent security to pursue uncertain independence. But when you've built something real, based on genuine expertise and authentic relationships, that foundation will support whatever you choose to create. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, thinking about tomorrow's meetings with potential new clients and the continuing growth of Cultural Bridge International. 6 months ago, I'd thought my career was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Have you ever experienced a moment when betrayal, or setback, forced you to recognize your true value and capabilities? Sometimes the people who try to diminish us end up showing us just how strong and capable we really are. Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you turned a challenging situation into an opportunity for growth and success. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others discover it. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult moments and turning setbacks into comebacks. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that their worth cannot be diminished by others' attempts to steal their shine. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your authentic value is unshakable. Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to help you recognize it fully. Here's to finding the courage to claim ownership of your capabilities and build the success you truly deserve.